Hi, my name is Lydia Cole. I'm the author of You Must Be Jones. Thank you so much for joining us for my second book reading. I apologize for being a little late, but we hope that you find it worth the wait. My book was written about my family as a way to document a story about one particular African American family in a small neighborhood just outside of Washington, D.C. My hope is that people see that African American neighborhoods and families have a wholesome and happy life, and that the picture that's so often shown in the media is not a real and accurate picture of what African American families' lives are like, and that you understand that there was much love and caring, and despite the struggles that many of us had to go through. So I hope you enjoy as I read a couple of passages from my book. First passage I'm going to read is from chapter 4, called Nana's House, and the particular section is called Home Again. With primarily Mom and Nana in the house, there were now fewer mouths to feed, but money was still in short supply. The country continued to suffer through the Great Depression, which would last until 1939. Like everything else, the Depression hit African Americans worse than most. Although Mom was the youngest and still in high school, she quit school to work full-time to help Nana pay the bills. It wasn't long after I left school that I met your father. I knew him all along. He was a cadet. I used to see him coming home in his uniform, looking all sharp. Mom and Dad had known each other already. Everybody in Halls Hill knew everyone else, or they knew of each other's families. One night at a neighborhood party, Mom and Dad got to know each other better. We were at a lawn party one night, and we got to talking, and that's how it started. We started dating, and then when I got married, we got married. I was 19, and he was 22. As Mom reminisced about this time, a huge smile came across her face. Lawn parties were a big deal for young people growing up on Halls Hill. Every weekend, somebody had a lawn party. They were a big thing. They sold all kinds of food, and they had music. It was more or less like a get-together, Mom said, as she recalled her teenage years. Our parents didn't have a wedding. They drove to Rockville, Maryland on November 17, 1941, only informing Mom's sister, Aunt Helen, who went with them to witness their nuptials. Possibly because they had discovered Mom was pregnant. Excited to share the news about their recent union, the newlyweds drove home. Entering the house, they were most likely nervous, but in a good way. Mom proudly announced their marriage to Nana and showed her the marriage license. A cold shoulder and a frown let them know Nana was not pleased. Several days passed before she could look at their marriage license. Mom's sister Beanie didn't help matters. She turned up her nose and expressed her displeasure. "I think that's awful," Aunt Beanie said. But our Aunt Helen was different. Mom adored her oldest sister, and it was easy to understand why. She congratulated the newlyweds and brought them a small wedding cake to celebrate their new beginnings as husband and wife. Years later, as Mom recalled this story to us, she seemed to understand Nana's reaction in hindsight. "You know, they always want you to marry the best," Mom said. Her family would come to learn he was the best. The next passage is from chapter 5. It's called A Home of Our Own. Dad was the last to leave for the war and the last to return home in April 1946. As soon as he arrived home, he wanted to purchase a house for his family. He returned to his job at the Washington Navy Yard, working to make that possible. 2.5 years was a long time to be separated from his young son and wife. As a 4-year-old, George Mason's recollections of Dad were through the letters Mom read him and the pictures tucked into each envelope. Years later, he thought back on what it felt like to have Dad home. Dad went to work, and I just remember being excited, running back and forth between our driveway to Miss Edgy's and Mr. Sam's house, and grabbing pears and fruit off the trees. I was just running around being a kid. In Nana's house, George Mason was the center of attention, not simply because he was Mom and Dad's only child. Between Nana, Uncle Clarence, and Uncle Dee Dee, there was always someone around with a big hug, ready to play ball, or surprise him with a candy or a toy. He was attentive to what adults did, especially Nana. Nana was always working around the house, washing clothes on the scrub board and hanging them outside to dry on the clothesline. For a while, they had chickens in a garden. On Saturday, they prepared for Sunday dinner by grabbing one of the chickens and chopping the head off. Then they would douse the chicken in a tub of hot water and take it to Nana to prepare for our Sunday dinner. George Mason had less than a year to grab all the attention he could get. By January 19, 1947, he had a baby brother named Michael. Everyone was excited about the new baby, except George Mason. George Mason said everything was great until Mike came. When George Mason wasn't out playing with his friends, he pouted around the house and yearned for the attention he once had to himself. After several months passed, he sat on the steps of Nana's front porch with Mike in his carriage. He looked sullen and mumbled to himself, "Why is everybody always playing with Mike? What about me? Why are Mama and Daddy always holding him?" A split second later, George Mason pushed Mike's carriage down the dirt road. It hit a bump. Up in the air it went. Ouch! Mike hit the ground and the crying began. The sound of a baby's cry sent Mama running to see what was going on. George Mason ducked under the porch where he thought he'd be hidden, at least for a while. Mom found him. "Come on out, boy. You could have hurt your brother. Why did you do that?" He stayed under the porch and refused to come out. He probably thought, maybe, just maybe, they will forget about me and the spanking he knew awaited him. Once Dad got home from work and heard the story, he tried coaxing George Mason. He still wouldn't budge. Dad told Mom, "Let him stay. When it gets dark, he'll be happy to come from under the porch." As Dad predicted, George Mason's fear of a spanking was no match for the darkness. As the sun set, with few, if any, street lights near the house, his fear of the dark got the best of him. Finally, he crawled from under the porch and went into the house. "Couldn't take the dark any longer, huh?" Dad remarked as he reached for the switch laying on the table in front of him. Before the switch touched George Mason's legs, the tears began to roll down his eyes. "Boy, I bet you'll think twice before you do anything like that again," Dad said. The spanking he tried to avoid was waiting for him, no less stinging than if it had been hours before. As he lay on the bed trying to recover from the painful episode, he had no idea just how much things would continue to change. George Mason began attending nursery school, where he was not the center of attention, and learned to share. Each weekday, he anxiously awaited to be picked up by someone from Mother Goose Nursery School. "Mama, the people from Mother Goose are here," he would call out as he stood at the door, watching for the car to pull up in front of the house. Thelma Nickerson, the school's owner and operator, was a neighbor of ours. In the early days of the school, classes were held at someone's home. She would later move the school to the basement of Second Baptist, an African-American church about 20 minutes away from our neighborhood. In nursery school, everyone learned the alphabet, numbers, colors, and social skills. When you left Mother Goose, you were ready for first grade. The next passage is from Chapter 7, Langston Elementary School. Langston Elementary had a multi-dimensional role in our community. In many ways, the school and the all-black fire station across the street from Langston, Fire Station number 8, were the hubs of our community, fulfilling multiple purposes beyond their designated function. The year before Roz attended school, Langston expanded beyond the original brick 4-classroom building. We had a cafeteria that doubled as a multi-purpose room, and first and second grade classrooms near our new school office on the first floor. The expansion of Langston meant Fire Station 8 was no longer the only place civic groups and organizations could meet. The John M. Langston Citizens Association, a powerful community organization, moved their meetings to Langston's multipurpose room, and groups later organized, like the Boy Scouts and Brownie troops, met at the firehouse. For a few hours during the day, the multipurpose room became a lunchroom. Mr. Mervyn, the school janitor, who was a close family friend, would unfold the long tables and benches that had been recessed into the wall and locked in place. They were reminiscent of a Murphy bed. At the end of the lunch period, he cleaned them off and placed them back into the wall. After school, the room became a rehearsal and practice area for cultural and fine arts activities offered through the recreation department. In those days, segregation touched every aspect of our life, even Arlington's recreation department. An African-American man named Mr. Johnson managed the recreation department for Arlington's black communities. There were a variety of activities to choose from. Students paid a fee for all kinds of lessons: piano, tap dance, ballet, majorette, saxophone, and clarinet. Most of the kids in our family took lessons after school. I took tap dance, and Roz took majorettes. Walking past the multipurpose room after school, you could hear light and joyful sounds. Click, 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 click. You heard the tapping of metal from the shiny patent shoes as they connected with the linoleum floors. On an alternate day, you would hear the cadence of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, as the ballet teacher called out the moves. Just beyond the multipurpose room in the library, students took piano, clarinet, and saxophone lessons. You didn't only hear the sounds and expressions of happiness coming from the multipurpose room and the library, you could feel them. The biggest beneficiaries of Langston's expanded facility were the teachers and the students. The addition of the kitchen and multipurpose room meant students could eat at school. Whether your lunch was from the cafeteria, where mom worked, or a brown bag, students now had a designated space to eat. This is one of my favorite chapters, chapter 8, Summertime. I'm going to read a passage from it. As kids, many of our most unforgettable moments happened in the 3 months between the last day of school and Labor Day. Summer brought with it an air of freedom. The day school ended, everything suddenly slowed down, and it felt like we didn't have a care in the world. In 1958, Linwood and I had just finished first grade, and we could go to the playground on our own, or at least with Roz. We explored the neighborhood, especially the wooded areas and creeks nearby. It wasn't as rural as when our parents grew up, but there were still wooded areas that beckoned to us to come in and explore. But our adventures almost always started on the playground. Somehow, everything worth remembering seemed squeezed into June, July, and August. We played and worshiped. Our friendships grew. Even teenagers who had part-time jobs and didn't have the luxury of total freedom found time to hang out with friends at the beach and enjoy a lawn party, just as our parents had done. It was all at once an ordinary and memorable, carefree and magical time. I was always an early morning riser, especially in the summertime. If the sun was up, I was too, even at 6 or 7 years old. In the steamy, hot summer days, we cooled our upstairs bedroom with screens placed in the window. Nearly every morning, I heard a woodpecker hammering on a tree. There was a chorus of nature sounds with the next-door neighbor's rooster chiming in for a while. I'd sit up, look out the window, hoping to see the woodpecker. It seemed so close, but I never laid my eyes on that bird. When I looked back at Roz and Audrey, they were still sleeping. Getting out of bed, I was careful not to wake them. Then I walked down the hall past Mike and Linwood's bedroom and downstairs to the bathroom. In our house, getting up at dawn wasn't about the early bird catching the worm. It was getting into the bathroom and out before my brothers and sisters woke up. With only one toilet in the house, our timing was everything. Some days, I wouldn't be so lucky. When I hit the bottom step and saw the bathroom door closed, I'd sigh, darn. Sitting on the steps where I could see the door, I waited until it started to open. Not a chance I wouldn't be next. But before but more often than not, when I came down the stairs, I could hear Mom in the kitchen, water running, cabinet doors closing. I peeked into the kitchen and greeted her as if I'd been up for hours. "Good morning, Mama." "Good morning, Lydia. Did you have a good night's sleep?" "Yes, ma'am," and into the bathroom I would go. It only took a minute for someone to slip by and get ahead of me. Occasionally I woke even earlier. Mom might still be sitting in her chair in the living room, reading her Bible. She always began her day with prayer and a private moment of worship. On the weekdays, we headed straight to the playground. Once Mom gave the okay, we were gone. Saturdays were different. Dad and Mom had a routine that started with creating the week's grocery list. "George, we're out of milk. We probably need a gallon to hold us over until the milkman comes next week. You know Mike can drink a milk by himself," Mom would say. "Anything else?" said Dad. "Pick up roast beef for dinner tomorrow, chicken, liver, and fish sticks for later in the week." It would go on until Dad had created the shopping list of all the items Mom wanted him to buy. Then Dad would let us know he was leaving. "Hey, Rosie, Linwood, and Lydia, come on, we're going to the Safeway." When Audrey was older, she'd come along too. We'd yell out, "Here we come, Daddy." Through the kitchen and out the back door we'd run, jumping into Dad's black Plymouth. Before going to the Safeway, we'd stopped at Nana's to pick up Uncle Dee Dee. He would shop for himself and Nana at the same time Dad was buying groceries for our family. From Nana's, it was a short trip up Lee Highway to the grocery store. Most businesses of note were on Lee Highway. It's where Langston Elementary School and Fire Station 8 were too. Closer to our neighborhood were several black-owned businesses, 2 barbershops, the dentist's office, and me and Linwood's godmother, Adele's beauty salon. Further down the Safeway were the Safeway and People's Drugstore. On the way to the grocery store, I thought about the allowance Dad would give us and what I'd buy. Dad parked in the Safeway lot and gave us each 25 cents allowance to spend on whatever we wanted. Across the street to the 5 and 10 cent store we ran, and Dad went grocery shopping. We entered the store, almost bouncing in anticipation of what toy we might choose. Up and down the aisles we walked until some toy or item caught our eye. Before long, we would feel the glare of a middle-aged white lady with black hair staring us down. My natural inclination was to smile and say hi, but her glare was cold and grimacing. Instead, my shoulders tensed, my head slightly dropped, in one moment shrinking as if to hide, in the next feeling afraid. Her scowl and mean spirit made us feel unwelcome. She didn't need to speak with this day. She wanted us to feel like we didn't belong. As we got older, we became more determined and stopped recoiling. We let go of our fear. With our heads held high, we continued to shop there whenever we wanted. The woman in the 5 and 10 cent store never watched or followed the white kids that came in, and we noticed. Every time we went in, she followed us. Those weekly visits to the 5 and 10 cent store were our first one-on-one encounters with racism. The next passage I'll read is from chapter 11, Church Life. Every summer, at least one of us went to the Baptist Center. Roz was the first to go. Then Linwood and I went, followed by Audrey and later Wilma. Most of us liked camp, while others like me and Mike, who had visited an earlier sleepaway camp, didn't find it to our liking. The Baptist Center was in a remote location, miles away from commercial businesses and residential communities, and hours away from our home. Kids came from all over Northern Virginia to spend a week or two. My first and only experience at camp was not one I wanted to relive. Linwood and I were there together, but he had friends like Jimmy to hang out with. I don't recall knowing any of the girls. Mom and Dad had paid for Linwood and me to attend camp for 2 weeks. Fortunately for me, I had to go home for a piano recital at the end of the first week. I begged Mom and Dad not to make me go back. Roz and Linwood both enjoyed camp and went on to be counselors, as did Audrey and Wilma. More than any of us, Audrey and Wilma were diehards. As kids, they were at the Baptist Center every chance they got. Audrey had to convince Mom to let her go away to camp. Because of my negative experience, Mom wasn't sure Audrey would like it there. But Audrey refused to take no for an answer. She worried Mom about going until she finally gave in. Once Audrey went to the Baptist Center, it became a summer destination she anxiously looked forward to from the time she was 9 until the age of 15. She started as a camper and then became a counselor. For Audrey, the camp gave her a sense of freedom and independence she had not enjoyed anywhere else. Hanging out with her friends Charmaine and Gail, sleeping and cooking outside, was Audrey's idea of fun. There was no one to tell the campers what clothes to wear or how to comb their hair. Outside of following the camp's rules, all the decisions were up to each camper. She made new friends and had a chance to learn leadership skills, watching and listening to teens who were counselors, like she would one day become. Wilma benefited from many of the same experiences as Audrey. She first visited the camp when Mom and Dad took Audrey for one of her 2-week stays there. When I was about 5 years old, I rode with Mom and Dad to drop Audrey off at camp, and I hid under a bed in the older girls' barracks. In my mind, I thought they would leave me, and I would get to stay at camp. Of course they found me, and I went home with them, Wilma said. Like Audrey, Wilma had friends that went to camp at the Baptist Center. Wilma's best friend, Cheryl, was a grandchild of Reverend Brown, and he was the camp director. Even before Wilma became a camper, she spent time at the Baptist Center. Reverend Brown often took Cheryl with him to the camp, and Wilma went along to keep her company. You had to be 8 years old to attend camp, and both Wilma and Cheryl were there every year that they were eligible. Wilma learned to swim at camp and later became a lifeguard there. The Baptist Center gave Wilma a chance to gain leadership skills and develop confidence, but she remembers it being in a much more structured way that Audrey had experienced. When I was 13, Reverend Brown got me on the Northern Virginia Baptist Association board as a youth representative. I'm not sure how he did it, but it gave me a chance to have a big speaking role there. All of the association's events were at the Baptist Center, so I spent time there beyond summer camp. The Baptist Center wasn't a fancy camp. It wasn't the trappings or decor that drew kids back year after year. It was what they learned about life, themselves, and others. It was a space where Black youth like Wilma and Audrey learned how to be resilient, confident youth and gain skills they would build upon for the rest of their lives. For 2 weeks every summer, they escaped the cocoon of their parents' watchful eyes to make mistakes, learn from them, and grow up a little more each year. Thank you so much for joining us for this reading. If there are any questions or anyone has, yes, John.
I have a question. What inspired you to do the book? When did you first conceive the idea, and then when did you sit down with a typewriter or a pen or whatever?
Well, I started taking notes and writing ideas. Oh, I guess when we lived in Texas. We lived in Texas for 12 years, and while I was there, I was watching television, and some of the things I would see on television just began to aggravate me, and just were just so foreign from what I experienced as a young African American child growing up. And I would get frustrated by seeing Black people constantly projected in a negative way. And I just knew that that wasn't true for most people that I knew. I felt like we needed to tell our stories. And I felt my family's story was a humble, wholesome, and loving story. And all of the people that grew up around me in my neighborhood, not that people didn't have struggles and things, but it was peaceful, it was loving. People looked out for each other, they took care of each other. It was really neighbors helping neighbors and a real sense of neighborhood. And so I decided that I wanted to share my story. And I wanted to, initially I kind of thought about writing it as a screenplay because I worked in television for 20 years. And But I just started, when I would think about it, I just started writing notes and I just started writing it down. And then when we came back and I had more time, I thought, I'm going to do this. And I particularly continued to see those same negative stories, and it would aggravate me. And I just wanted to share from my own personal perspective what life was like growing up as a young African American. Not that there weren't struggles and there weren't difficulties, but there was more love and more caring and concern among families, among neighborhoods, and among individuals than we ever saw on television. And I felt like it needed to be shared.
So when did you start writing the book then?
I started writing the book during COVID. I started writing the book in February of 2020.
Wow.
And I published it in December of 2020.
Okay. Fascinating. One thing that's occurred to me is, like, how can you get stories like this in our schools? Like, I mean, there would be excerpts from this book that I would think a young grade school person could relate to, and then other passages would probably be more appropriate for middle or high school people.
Right.
But I mean, have you thought about sharing this with the school system? I mean, I'm just wondering, like, okay, so Marguerite Gooden, right, was a teacher for a long time, and I wondered if she might have some ideas as to maybe thinking
Well, Marguerite's
about.
in this book. Marguerite is my peer. We went to school together. We went to Mother Goose Nursery School together.
Okay.
Marguerite Brice, you speak?
Yeah, Gooden is her
Gooden.
her married
That's right,
name.
her married name. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, I talked to her. One of the things, to be just totally transparent about writing a memoir, is that it is so personal.
Mm-hmm.
So it's taken me a while to really get out and really talk to people about it in a very public way.
Yeah.
But thanks to Felecia giving me this warm and welcoming environment, I hope to do more of these, and then I'll be approaching some bookstores and libraries as well to try to get the book in there. But later in the book also, there's my personal family's perspective about integrating Arlington County schools, about the March on Washington, which my sister attended, about the Black Power movement, about Martin Luther King's being assassinated. One of the, I think, unique things about growing up where we did, when we did, was that much of the history of African Americans in the 20th century we experienced in our day-to-day lives.
Absolutely.
And so we capture that, and I capture that in this book from our family's perspective. My sister was, I think she was 15 maybe, or maybe younger, maybe 13. But when she went to the March on Washington, and she talks about how a group from our church went, and she went with them, and how she didn't, at the time, they didn't realize just how important it was. But, I just always look at her with awe, the fact that she had the chance to be there. She was there at the reflecting pool, at that most incredible historic moment. My brother, of course, was integrated, one of the 4 students that integrated Langston Elementary. One of the things that doesn't get shared often about that experience of integration is people always talk about the moment of integration, but very seldom do they talk about what we, Gwen, me, Marguerite, what we went through, and my brother, when we integrated, because it wasn't all peaches and cream. We went to school. I talk about walking in the halls at Langston, personally, at Langston at Stratford, where there were 1,000 white students and a handful of black students. More than what my brother, or at least only 4 of them. There were more of us, but it's still we were not. It wasn't like a community. We went to school and then we left. We didn't have friends there. People didn't embrace us. They didn't hang out with us. And I tell a story, and me and Gwen went recently to our 50th year anniversary for Washington Lee a couple of years ago. And when they were reaching out to me and saying, well, you know, trying to get one of the organizers, we're trying to get some of the black students to attend, but, you know, we can't get anybody to attend. Why won't anybody attend it? I said, but we didn't have any friends. We went to school there, but we didn't have white friends. So for us to go, the friends that we have, we don't have to go to the reunion to see them. So we don't have the same affinity for W&L or Stratford as you do, because we were not included. We were there, we went to class, but we weren't part of that community. Nobody was reaching out to us, trying to hang out with us. Nobody was trying to date us. Nobody was trying to, it just didn't happen. So that's something that people don't think about. You know, we felt alone a lot of times. You know, we were the only black person in our classrooms. I talk about walking down the hall and looking to find somebody's eye to connect with that you knew, and often there wasn't anyone. So those aren't great memories for us, you know.
Lydia, I'm curious. During those times in the 60s and 70s, how connected did the African American community in Halls Hill feel to the folks in Green Valley and Arlington View, Johnson Hill, other African American communities in Arlington? Did you like feel a kind of community and solidarity with each other, or were you pretty much just like, you know, your own neighborhood?
Well, we were our own neighborhood, but we always felt connected because, so the recreation department, for one thing, connected us.
Okay.
So we did things together. We played, the teams competed against each other. We used to always have a big playground day, and that was always together. We would come from Halls Hill, we would come to Jenny Dean.
Right.
And we would come down to Jenny. That was an annual thing. So that's when we got to know people from South Arlington. One of the things that kind of, for Gwen and my generation, that didn't give us a connection that my oldest brother had, was the fact that we didn't go to HB. So when people would leave Langston and go to Hoffman Boston for junior high school and high school, that's when those connections were made. For us on Halls Hill, it was a big deal because Halls Hill is a much smaller community than Green Valley. So we got to meet, you know, other people from, you know, Green Valley. It was just many more people, and we look forward to that. In many ways, I speak for myself, I was kind of disappointed that I couldn't go to HB because I was looking forward to that social life and, you know, expanding my connections. And my brother, my oldest brother, he knew people all over, but he knew them because they went to school together in junior high school and high school. We didn't have that. So going to Stratford really kind of cut us off from part of our social life that we looked forward to. So we didn't, because we didn't go to school together, we probably didn't have as close a connection as my brother did, but as communities, we were black communities, we supported each other. It didn't matter whether you knew anybody or not.
Right.
What they were going through, we went through, and we all rallied around each other.
Good. Oh, Lydia, I'm Frederick Craddock. I'm Warren Craddock's cousin.
Oh, okay.
And I read Wilma's book, fascinating. So I have to read this.
Oh, thank
This
you.
is a follow-on to me. Did you have any challenges or real disappointments in level setting the history that we have in books about Arlington, about Virginia, and then in your book? Because when I read Wilma's book, I was so many times on so many pages, I was, oh wow,
Yeah.
I didn't know that happened.
Yeah.
I didn't know that happened. But as I think John was alluding to, there can be some real vague things in the history books
Sure.
about Arlington and about the state of Virginia.
Right.
And I think few people know that, you know, Virginia was the last holdout state for integration. I mean, Bob Alexander was filing lawsuits in 1971 with integrating schools. So did you really feel any disappointment or challenges trying to level set that history between what's written and what you're writing and what you found?
I didn't. I just told the truth. So I didn't worry. I mean, I didn't even, you know, Wilma's book was, it was just an incredible documentation of a Halls Hills history. And so I felt like she did that. She'd already done that level setting.
Mhm.
This was more about
And family.
family. It was about family and about a look inside.
Mhm.
So it was very personal to really open up my family and talk honestly about, growing up as, 7 kids in a 4-bedroom house with my uncle there. So at some point there were 10 of us living in our house. It never felt crowded to us. It was just the way it was. We had everything we needed. We had a huge backyard that, we used to play baseball in. We had loving parents. We never missed a meal. And we just, we didn't think about it at the time. Looking back on it, it's like, my kids had their own bedrooms and, and we had friends even that had, Gwen, my friend, Gwen has a brother. They each had their own bedrooms and things like that. But it wasn't like, it was just the way it was. We weren't, we didn't want for anything. Our parents gave us everything they could and more, probably, than they could. And they made sure that we had a wholesome, healthy life, and they prepared us to go on and do better than they had done.
Exactly. I can say amen to that. I live
That's
that.
right.
Yeah. We had, it's in the book, but my father's the most important thing my father, other than being an incredible dad, he was an incredible dad and an incredible husband.
And great, too. According to what Wilma says about, his job history and the things
Oh yeah.
he did, with the Navy and some
Absolutely.
other things.
Yeah, he was a brilliant man, but he was a humble man,
Right.
And he, more than anything, he wanted all of his kids to go to college. So, and he did. He accomplished that. All 7 of us went to college. I don't care what stature of life you're from, that's an accomplishment. So, it was all about family and about what black family means, about, I don't want pulling yourself up by your bootstraps or whatever, but making a way when they looked like there was no way, and never giving up. They just never gave up. And our community and my family, faith and family and neighbors really all kept everyone together. It was their faith that let them know, no matter what, we know that we will get through this, and that things will be better on those days when it was rough. They didn't talk about it. They didn't talk about whatever struggles they had. I'm sure they had a lot, but they never shared it with us. They allowed us to be kids, and that was the other thing. We didn't. I had friends, and I'll talk about it in the book. But it was one of the things that I talk about. I had friends whose parents were very strict about making them clean up the house. We had chores. We all had chores, but we weren't responsible for cleaning up the house. My mom, she cooked, she washed clothes, she cleaned the house. The only thing she told us to do, we had to do our schoolwork, and we had to clean our bedrooms. Other than that, in some ways, when I went off on my own, I'd never wash my own clothes. I had to learn how to wash, because my mother washed my clothes. Even one of the times when I moved back home, she would still wash my clothes, That was just who she was. She was, as we were growing up, she felt it was important to allow us to be kids, and she gave us that. And that was pretty special.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So on Lee Highway, you mentioned some of the businesses, the barber shops and so forth, and then of course there was Fire Station number 8. And one thing that really struck me when I was on the county board was how much the history and the legacy of Fire Station number 8 meant to Halls Hill. And then, when some people said, well, we got to move it further north, to serve all the folks up there where there's not a whole lot of people, compared to who's on Lee Highway. And that fight really took hold with me. And I felt it was important that we keep Fire Station number 8 at that location and rebuild there. And I'm really excited that, there is going to be a lot of commemoration and a lot of history built into the new structure of Fire Station number 8 when that starts.
Yeah.
So that's really going to be nice.
Well, that
And you need to have your book up there too in a little case or something.
Well, I
But
just think I
Lydia,
could-
didn't you have something to do with that too, though?
I was on the committee.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I was
Okay.
on the committee when even though I wasn't living there, I had when I was in grad school at Georgetown, I did a visual story for a class I was taking on branded storytelling, and my story was about Fire Station 8, and Kitty saw that story and asked, when she saw that story, she asked if they could use it, and she asked me if I would come to the meeting and talk about my story, and asked me to be on the committee. So that's kind of how.
How's Kitty doing? I haven't seen her since before the virus.
I haven't seen her. I don't know. I think I saw something on Facebook not long ago, but she seemed like she was doing okay. But I think she's fine.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
So would you say most people in Halls Hill went to either Callaway or Mount Salvation, or were there a fair number of people who would go to the churches in Green Valley or Arlington View and vice versa?
Most people didn't go to the churches in Green Valley. There were a couple of other churches on Halls Hill. One was a holiness church.
Right.
On
What was that? Cameron?
No, it's just the name of that street that Miss Allen's is on.
Right.
I think-
Columbus?
Columbus Street.
Yeah.
So there was a church on Columbus Street, and so some people went there, but the majority of people who lived on Halls Hill went to Callaway or Mount Salvation. Those were the
Okay.
two oldest churches.
Right, right. Yeah, and now the cemetery for Mount Salvation has been designated a historic landmark, and I think they're going to be putting in a plaque pretty soon.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Great. Gwen and I both went to Mount Salvation.
Okay.
Yeah, we grew up there.
Sure did.
I'd just like to say thank you, Lydia. This was such a great book signing, but it also was so knowledgeable, learning about your family and how it relates to every Black family across America, not only in Arlington, but just across America. People just get the wrong idea about what a Black family is really about. So I really thank you,
Thank you.
for doing this.
Well,
And I love having you here today.
That's for
Thank
sure.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me, Felecia. It couldn't have been a better place and a better group of people and a better person to have to do my first book reading. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
So this was your first?
Yeah.
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 Oh, wow.
Your first reading.
Nice. You're breaking ground.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good.
Thank you.
Felicia,
Okay.
maybe you want to say something
Right.
about your business. You should.
Oh, definitely.
Sure.
I thank you for saying that. Anybody who's watching in, you must come to FOHTA from one hand to another. It's a really special place. I mean that sincerely. It just has a spirit, and the work on the walls, Felicia's artistry and her spirit is every place through this. It's just a welcoming and loving environment, and I definitely I would come here definitely again. And it's just so many things. It's one of the things I saw that I'm like, I want to buy that for my home. The Shepherd's Psalm, that is just beautiful. I love it. And it's a special place, and I'm so glad that I had a chance to be here for my book reading, and I'm hoping that some people who came here and hadn't been here before will definitely come back here again and to patronize your business. Thank you.
I'm sure of that. All right.
And one last thing, Gail, she says to tell Lydia hello and congratulations.
Thank you, Gail.